Today in the Leadership Sandbox, friends, we're talking culture. One of my favorite topics, the kind that drives performance and not just decorates your break room walls. My guest is Eyad Mubaied, accountant by education and corporate background, who escaped Cubicle Nation just like me, whoop, whoop, and now the founder of Cultivate Culture LLC. He's the author of The Culture-Driven Organization and a leader who knows how to turn culture into real results. From the boardroom to the team huddle, Eyad helps leaders build cultures that actually work. So let's dig into the sandbox and welcome in my guest, Eyad. I'm so glad to have you here.
Same here. Thank you, Tammy. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. Let's get in because I've got some questions. Let's start with your journey. You were in finance with L3, you're accountant by trade. And what I find to be funny is that we've talked a lot about your Myers-Briggs and different assessments that you've done. Mm-hmm. And you're an accountant by trade, as I said, and you founded this company, Escaped Cubicle Nation. And now you're working all things Cultivate Culture LLC. What called you to focus on organizational culture?
That's funny. You talk about the background. So I worked at KPMG, so it's a big four company, CPA firm for 16 years, and then L3 Harris for 8 years. Recently, I actually listened to or watched the Accountant movie, and I can tell you my life is not like that. So yes, it's a major shift from an accountant to the culture person, but definitely not how it's portrayed in the movie. But basically, really, cultures. I loved culture. I'm originally from the Middle East, and I've always wondered. My parents took us to Europe all the time to escape the summer of the United Arab Emirates or the UAE. So I've always kind of experienced cultures just throughout my life, and even getting into the cubicle nation, as you call it, or the corporate world, I started noticing, well, why is culture good in some teams and culture not good in other teams? Sometimes, I would be with great leaders and their culture would not be the best. They're doing the best they can, but maybe the organization is large or too large for them to kind of instill all of that in their people. So I've always wondered kind of what the secret sauce is. I call it in my book, The Secret Recipe. So really over time, culture was something that I just noticed and I loved. And I tried to, as a leader in multiple organizations, really put the culture that I want and I desire, but I never really had a model to pinpoint to until one day I was I was reading an article. It was a PowerPoint presentation, if I recall correctly, about 6 or so years ago. It didn't have the word culture whatsoever. It had on it mindset, system, competency, no arrows, nothing. And then all of a sudden my brain just jumbled all of this, and I came up with a culture creation model, which I know we'll talk about. But since that point on, I've tried it, and the more I tried it, the more I believe in it. Hence, me writing the book to help leaders really cultivate the culture they desire in their organizations.
And so the part that called you is really just probably from your own frustration of experience.
Yeah, it's frustration. It really is the love of humanity, and what I've seen in the culture creation model, and even now since I started the company a year ago and published the book about a year ago, I've seen leaders really transform, be able to say, oh, now I understand what it is. Now I know how to do it. So those results is really what speaks to me is trying to help leaders. Because at some point you are going to change your behavior, and we'll talk about the definition, etc. You'll change your behavior and your people's behavior. So it's not like you're going and investing in an ERP, or you're buying a company, or it's a mindset and how you live. So there isn't really a lot of, let's say, cost to it as much. I mean, it starts with the mindset, which doesn't cost a lot to change one's mindset. It's something that just calls to me because I love humanity. I love organizations that I work with, and I want them to do better. And that culture secret recipe will significantly enhance your chances as a leader to achieve the objectives you desire.
There you go. And I will say this on mindset, because that's my jam.
Yep.
Boy, when we don't change our mindsets, it sure does cost a lot in an organization.
Absolutely, in the negative way.
Right? It doesn't. It really ought not cost a lot to change, but hokey dyna, it sure does if you don't. So you say in your book, we've talked about this, that culture is driven, not discovered, right?
Yeah.
So what's the most common misunderstanding that you see when leaders try to fix their culture?
It's interesting. The biggest misunderstanding that I see is confusing the definition of culture. So many times, and I know we both live in Florida, so it's mango trees are all around us. So when I use analogies, I like to use the mango tree. People confuse culture, the tree, with the fruit of culture, which is the mango. So a lot of people, when you even look, when I started writing the book back in January of 24, I was thinking, well, I can't be the only one who's thinking about this. When I went out and bought a couple of books and I looked at it, it came back and it's all about the fruit of the tree. So if you want a culture of respect, here's what you do. If you want a culture of whatever, here's what you do. But not necessarily, well, here's the process going from you as a leader, respect in your mind is a trait that you want, to all the way the process so that you're 10,000 people deal with each other, with customers, with respect. So it's one of the biggest misunderstandings. It's just the definition of culture, and how do you even get there? Because if you can't define it, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. If you can't improve it, then it's a big problem.
Well, then you better define culture, because we haven't really done that. So let's lay that as a foundation before we dig deeper.
Absolutely. So the way I defined it is the manifestation of the shared beliefs reflected in common behavior. So if you think about, typically the misunderstanding is people think culture is the behavior itself. So even when people talk about, well, our culture, and then they talk about values as something that's different than culture, or talk about mindset as different than culture, they almost, culture is a subset of what happens in an organization. And to me, the whole manifestation of the shared beliefs reflected in the common behavior, the totality of it is what I call culture. So it starts from, first you have to have beliefs, and then these beliefs have to be shared by the leaders, and then they go and manifest it into the process, and then they go put it in their people. And when their people's behavior become the same thing as the belief that the leaders want, then that's where you have all these three things lining up to become culture.
Okay. All right. Well, so let's talk about who really sets the culture in an organization then. And I'm also, I want to go to the other opposite side of that, is who most commonly or most often avoids owning it.
That's a good question, and I was thinking about this. At least in my experiences, right? The CEO, chief executive officer, whoever the number one person in an organization. And by the way, there's a reason I the way I named the book includes organization, not company, not business, because it's any organization that's organized. Even you as an individual, you're an organism, so you can even apply the same methodologies for you as a leader with your own personal culture. But the way I kind of think about it is, chief executive officer is also known as chief everything officer. Okay. So they pretty much should own, depending on how you define own, everything in that organization. But then when you start kind of saying, okay, well, if I have a large enough organization and now I have a head of HR, head of legal, head of finance, maybe head of ops, head of investments, if you're, investment insurance company maybe, and you have a different head of investment. The way I think of ownership, right, or accountability, is that CEO is not gonna do everything themselves, so they're gonna share accountability with somebody else under them. If it's HR, it's people related matters and hiring and firing and promotions, etc. And if it's a finance person, which is where my background is, you have financial planning, you have accounting, you have budgeting, you have taxes, whatever. So there's an element of, when you come in and ask a CEO of something, they might say, well, I don't know taxes. I don't know whatever. Let me bring in the finance person. So let me bring in the CFO into the room. But then when it comes to culture, it becomes interesting. Because if culture is the manifestation of the shared beliefs reflecting common behavior, and it's the beliefs of the one leader, then that assigning of that responsibility becomes a little bit harder in my view. Recently, and I know you're very close to many organizations, even worldwide. Recently, this notion of a chief culture officer started coming up in the past 5-10 years, which is good. I mean, you need somebody who is responsible for culture, accountable for it, who might have the processes no different than closing the books for the CFO. It's not the CEO who's responsible per se; they're accountable at the end. But culture is interesting because it needs to be owned by the CFO for financial related matters. Because if it's a manifestation of shared beliefs reflected in common behavior, well, everybody in finance is going to behave a certain way. The processes will be set up in a certain way. Well, but that's no different than the chief legal or the chief people officer or the chief investment officer, because culture, it's the CEO's minds and belief all the way up to their people, all the way down to the lowest level across the whole organization. So I think, to me, the CEO can farm out or can maybe carve out some tasks and some responsibility and accountability, but they can't say, well, that's not me, that's HR, right? Or like a CFO, well, that's not me, that's HR. Well, you can't do that because every leader is responsible for culture throughout the organization, no matter how high or low you are. But the top leader is the one who's going to set the tone. That's why it's called the tone at the top. It's the top, not halfway top.
Right.
So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, it's very true. Leaders are the ones that set the direction. Culture is going to set itself by design or by default. And so either design the behaviors that you're looking for. As I say, what do we want to be known, seen, and celebrated for? What are we standing for?
Absolutely.
What are the outcomes that we're wanting to produce? And what do we want people to say about us at the end of it? That's setting the expectations of how we want to be perceived and how we want to be received in the organizations, not just heavy hitting on numbers, bottom line, get it all done.
Absolutely. And culture, even I had an incident once where I was talking to one of my bosses, chief accounting officer at an organization, and one of my values is highest ethical standards and highest integrity. And he looked at me and he said, "You would be great in internal audit." So I sat back and I was like, but shouldn't that value be across the whole organization? Like
Mhm.
if I bend the rules, then it's okay for me to be in accounting and finance. But if I don't and I follow them, then I can be in, a chief audit executive. So it's interesting because at the end of the day, values, if you are highly ethical, if you are, let's say, respectful, if you think outside the box, if you continuously improve, whatever value is, which is part of your mindset and philosophy, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. If it's in your CEO, it needs to be in your CFO, it needs to be in your COO, it needs to be in your chief HR officer. So it doesn't really matter. Values are values throughout the whole organization.
Well, and every individual owns their own values. So I have my own values, and if the values of the organization don't align with mine, that's why I did escape Cubicle Nation. Was I found that I was
Yeah,
like, oh, hold on a minute, I'm a demoralized middle manager in an environment where my core values don't align with the values of the organization. I'm not wrong, they're not wrong, we're not bad for it. It was a really good place to be recognizing
yeah,
it because it was just going to continue to foster frustration on both parts. And where I see people get hung up is when we recognize it and don't take action on it, right? Or even to be able to go, okay, wait, what's out of alignment here? And that is a cultural component as well. There's a cultural component to how we align from a values perspective to the values of the organization. My experience, that helps us to model the culture that's being set, and to your point, from the top, right? And the
yeah.
people who avoid that are really the people on the bus that, I want to insert the slow to hire, quick to fire in that moment, like move people on, because if they're either, give them a chance, they're either going to get on the bus and be all for it or not. But that has to come from a top. And I will say this about your chief culture officer: I'm not a fan of those positions. I
Mm,
think that they take the responsibility away from the key leaders at the top of the organization that are setting what the expectations for the culture will be.
yep.
And it doesn't default to HR either. You and I have talked about that before, that it's not HR's responsibility to create or set the culture. They certainly can have a part in it and collaborate in it. And it is a very collaborative process. And to that end, I know you have a model, the culture creation model, and I
Yeah.
want you to share that with us so that, because I know that really, it's a very unique and creative way of looking at, and yet very simple all at the same
Mhm.
time, right? Unique, creative, and quite simple about how we look at creating culture. So share that with us, please.
Absolutely. And from our earlier conversation, so that day, and I still remember it vividly, I had it printed out. It was like a Six Sigma type of presentation, and it had in it mindset, system, competency. And all of a sudden, just my brain went blank, and there was this upload of, oh my gosh, this is how you create culture. So the way I think about it is philosophies is the middle circle. Okay, so these are things like your core values, values in general, your vision, your mission. So it's everything that's in the hearts and minds and eyes, if you close them, especially that you're looking into the future of the ultimate leader of the organization, that then gets truncated down into the different, or assigned down to the different leaders. And the more closer you are with your philosophies, the better you are as an organization. We'll talk about that. But it's basically the first step is defining your philosophies in general. Part of it is the why, kind of like what Simon Sinek talks about, right? It's the why, but there's also a lot more to philosophies, and I share about that in the book. So you define your philosophies as a leader, one or multiple groups of philosophies. Then the second circle, that's the larger one, is called process. So you put that philosophy into a process because you're the leader or assigning your responsibilities, accountability down to middle management to go create the process that these philosophies would go into. So it's philosophies, process, and then ultimately, when your philosophies are ending up in the process, then you go instill them in your people. So when these three circles line up strategically, so your philosophies, process, people, and that's where the mindset became philosophy, the systems became process, and the competency became people in that one chart. When these three circles line up, then you have the culture you desire. Think of Chick-fil-A, right? It's always known to be a hospitable type of a culture. Every time you say thank you to a Chick-fil-A person, they look at you and they say, my
It's
pleasure,
my pleasure.
right? Exactly. It doesn't really matter what your personal views are to some extent. If you don't like that, then you're not going to work there. But the idea would be somebody somewhere in California where it's or Chick-fil-A, maybe Atlanta, somewhere in there that they are headquarters, somebody thought of a philosophy, went and put it in a process, then instilled it in their people. And when that, it's the same idea of the definition, manifestation of shared beliefs, that's your philosophy, reflected in common behavior, that's your people. The reflection comes through the process. And when
That's
those
great.
three things line up, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So let's dig in a little deeper then. So I love that model. And which part of that do you suppose that leaders underestimate the most? And why does it matter?
I think it's philosophies, honestly. And it's an interesting question because there's an underestimation from an effort standpoint and an underestimation from an importance standpoint. And let me break that out a little bit. So I think the underestimation of the importance is the philosophies, because many times when, and I was in Cubicle Nation as you call it, and I would come in and I would find out that there was some disagreement at the people level, and then very few leaders dig a little deeper into that culture creation model and go into the process, but extremely rarely that people go into philosophies. And once I created that model, my conversations became much easier to come into where is the root cause of the disagreement. Are we disagreeing on a process issue, a person issue, or is it a philosophy issue?
Yeah.
When you have a leader who, let's say, thinks that, hey, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. I mean, not necessarily that that's bad, that's just a philosophy, right? And another leader or a follower like me who wants to continuously improve, well, that's a clash in philosophy. We could keep arguing all day long how the process should be, but unless we know that the root cause of the disagreement is philosophy, we're not going to get to, even if we change the process, if the leader who thinks in a certain way, they're going to override that process and kind of continue to change it back to where it's supposed to. So that, I think, is one of the importance of it becomes very understated. Now the effort, I think its process is the effort, because many people go to, or many leaders think, well, I'm thinking this way, continuously improving, I'm acting upon it, which is good, but unless you put it in a process so that your people will follow it, you can have a lot of effort going on. Chick-fil-A as an example, they spend a lot of time on process so that that one individual would say my pleasure 100% of the time. Even if you're making fun of them and keep on saying thank you just for fun of it, they're going to keep on telling you my pleasure. Why? Because their leaders spent a lot of time training it. And I think that's part of a little bit of the underestimation, is people underestimate the importance of that process.
Well, and I think when you talk about philosophy, that's getting into the why, right? The why of what is our why? It might be my belief, it might be a core belief, it may be my faith, just what the
Yep.
4 generations before us coming into this company built it on. This is our philosophy, but here's the why it's
Yep.
important. And that, when you take that, and a lot of times what I've
Mhm.
seen, I'm not sure from your perspective, is that using your model of philosophy, process, people, that when they skip past the philosophy or they lean too heavily on this is our why, this 4 generations, my great grandfather did it this way and this is what he wanted, and we're honoring his legacy, but then we don't transfer that into the process, right? And explain how we model that in each different position in whatever type of organization, company you have. That's a part where I see they oversimplify and brush past the importance of the why at the
Yep.
philosophy level. And then they don't
Absolutely.
take the time to put it into the process because they think, oh, well, it's on the wall. We talk about it. It was in your onboarding if they have those. You know, it was part
Yeah.
of the interview questions and you answered it right. So we figured you would just know.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a, unfortunately, it's a real, it attacks the culture often that we're really wanting to build because we didn't
Absolutely.
clearly define the why.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because part of my experience, even on the finance side, like there's something that we call assertion. So even when you look at a balance sheet or an income statement and
I
the
don't like
CEO,
those
yeah, I
actually.
know, I know. Maybe you need a fractional CFO at some point. But when you look at some of those numbers, right? Like at the end of the day, when you say my accounts receivable or what my customers owe me is $10, well, you can say that all day long, but unless you have a process that captures that, reconciles that, etc., you would have no idea if that's a $10 or not. So,
Correct.
so the idea of philosophies on a wall. That's when I ask. I mean, I've had so many different conversations with many different CEOs, and they say, "Oh yeah, we believe in." Continuous improvement. And I was like, okay, great. Is it on part of your core values? And we look, and no, it's not. And sometimes if it is, I'd be like, okay, well, help me understand what's your process of making sure that everybody's thinking continuous improvement. That's when the light bulb goes on. It goes
And how do you
from,
define it?
yeah. And how do you define it? Do you have and honestly, every single core value, I can help a CEO think through definition, measurement, and then even how do you track it? How do you track it on a leading indicator, not just a lagging indicator? Because sometimes lagging indicators like your sales or how profitable you are, how happy your employees are, that's if there's damage, the damage is already done.
Right.
There's more than enough ways that you can do things that are on a leading indicator so early on in the process. Think a mango tree. You can always say, yeah, hey, Mr. or Miss Farmer, how do you know that your mango tree is working? You can always say, well, if I have fruit, which is true, if you have fruit, it's good. But what if something is not working? Are you going to wait until the harvest for you to find out that something is not working? You can always go to a lagging indicator, look at the soil, look at much water you're putting, how much sunlight, the dirt, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's always ways if you're serious about it and you really want as a leader to invest time in it. There's
Yeah.
always ways for you to know that much earlier.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to keep moving through here because this is
Yeah.
really great information. And I know that people can pick up a copy of your book. And where can they get a copy of your book?
Lovely Amazon. Amazon makes it very easy. Culture driven organization, or you can put my name and I'm the only Eyad Mubaied out there. So
For now,
at
I
least
don't
the
know.
one
There
who
might,
wrote
yeah,
the one who
right.
wrote the book without AI.
Yes, it's a great read, and I've gone through the model, and I've tied it to the work that we do here at the Leadership Sandbox, and in our training models and all of that. And I'm like, okay, there's a lot of parallels, which is really great, and I love that. And one of the things that I appreciate about your mind, because I always say I do people, I don't do numbers, but then I have people challenge me all the time that are numbers people. They go, no, Tammy, you actually do numbers really well. Okay, yeah, but don't tell me that. But I want to tie it to an auditing question. So, how can a leader start auditing their culture without getting stuck in blind spots?
It's interesting. It will all become a part of how do you define it?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want your culture to be, first of all? The
Mm-hmm.
easiest way, again, is sales and profit.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. There are studies out there between the Harvard Business Review, you have Gallup, you have plenty of others that talk about a difference between from profit and revenue, because at the end of the day, numbers are numbers, and when you make money, that's reflected through your financial health and financial results. If you have a company that is not really as good or maybe average in their culture versus company that's much better in their culture, the studies show that if you're a really good cultured company, you should expect your increase in revenue, so the annual increase, to be 3 times the average.
It's
So let's
crazy.
say you're in an industry and your average, organically, you're not doing any mergers and acquisitions, you're not divesting, you're not doing anything like anything else, right? Nothing major, no new products, whatever, just on average. If you're supposed to grow at a 10% revenue per year in your industry, in your location, if you're a really good culture, you would grow at 30%. Profit is the same thing. It's 7 times. So if you're going up in 5% every year in profit, and that's just the average for your
Mm-hmm.
industry, location, etc., you should expect 35%. So if these numbers are not there, So if your numbers are, oh, I'm doing great, 10% profit this year. Okay, well, what's the average for the industry? It's 10%. Well, guess what? Then you likely have an average culture, because and the philosophical, maybe it's not, it's more than philosophical reasoning behind it, is culture is so pervasive. If it's the
Mm-hmm.
manifestation of shared belief, reflected in common behavior, then the behavior of your people is what drive that 7 times increase in profits, or that
That's
three
right.
times increase in revenue. So if you're not there and you're just average, then guess what? Your culture cannot be an awesome culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
It's
I've
true.
talked to so many CEOs where they're like, "Oh yeah, my culture is awesome," and I was like, "Well, that's so funny, because where does the average 30% of culture comes in the US or in the world? Because that's where we're at now. Around
Right.
30% is how strong our culture is, which is closely tied to employee engagement. So, and I'm like, everybody I talk to, they think their culture is at 80%. And I was like, well, that's odd, because the average is 30%. So to me, that would be the first one. Is That's the easiest. Just compare
Mm-hmm.
yourself, revenue and profit, to everybody else around you on average. And if you are not 7 times more in profit and 3 times more in revenue, then your culture will likely require an improvement. Now, there's other one-offs, right? Like, no matter how good
That's
your
interesting.
culture is, Blockbusters, the day they went bankrupt, okay, it doesn't really matter. Part of it is because their culture likely wasn't that good. That's why they went into where they were. But it's there might be some exceptions to it. But to me, that's the easiest indicator, right?
Mm.
Now, there's other indicators. There is actually a company that I work with that they do a culture assessment, and they go through the whole process, and they have their own methodology of a culture assessment through multiple questionnaire. I have my own assessment at the end of the book that I
Mm-hmm.
put in there. So if somebody wants to audit it, they can really go down that assessment path in the book.
Very
And
cool.
there's numerous other ways that they can do it through employee engagement, etc.
That's great. It's very important. And I just want to put a stronger period on the end of that, is that leaders at every level, really, we want you to be thinking about what's the health of your organization from a cultural perspective. And if you see within your team, your department, that growth isn't happening, then we want to dig into that and figure out why. Is it because of a toxic culture? Is it because of an
Yeah,
unhealthy culture? Is it because of a, going back to, we actually haven't processed, we created the process for developing the culture that we want?
yeah,
I will share this, and I will not name the name of the organization, but it's a organization that I've come to know well, and they appoint people to positions without the managers actually doing any of the interviewing. And so other leaders will go through, higher up will go through and interview candidates for a position, to fill a position, and place it on the team under a
yeah,
manager that there's no introduction. And they walk in and go, "Oh, you're my new hire." Okay. It's like, hold on a second. How do you even know if that's a fit culturally for the team?
yeah,
Maybe there were other people internally that wanted to go for that. But what it does is it demoralizes then the very people, and it impacts the culture in a negative way, but it's part of their
yeah,
process that they do. Well, then, are they growing? Are the teams, there's so many things I want to say about that, but I have to be careful. Bottom line is, as a middle manager, you're not at the top, but you do set the culture for your team, and you can
yeah,
set the culture for your process, right? Your philosophy as the leader, your process of how you actually want people to model that. It's very important that you cultivate from that perspective, because your people want you to, and your
yeah,
people need you to, even if they've been assigned to you. So no different as when you go into, and I think this is where managers, middle managers especially, get lost in the culture conversation, because it is true. Setting the culture for the organization comes from the top.
yeah,
100% agree with that. And I also believe that culture can be shifted, changed, and transformed from the middle and even the bottom, because we can take a stand at a team level, at a unit level, at a department level, of what our philosophies and our processes are for our people to succeed
yeah,
here.
absolutely. And even the story, Tammy, if we take the story you mentioned, a lot of people, even in the one you said, the people circle, okay, well, maybe we're not there yet because we're just hiring the people coming in from the outside. You could even argue the leadership, the executive leadership, even if they put culture in the interview process. Let's just give it that. I know you said they don't, but let's even say that that's the case. Then the question that I start to ask is, well, what's the root cause of current issues as a result of this process.
Oh, there are
And
many.
unless you start, yeah, and unless you start going into the philosophies, that's where
Yep.
things like, okay, hold on. So CEO or CFO or whoever is making those decisions, how are you going to hold your middle manager accountable, right? If you
Yep.
hire the person that is, even if they're perfect culturally, how could you then give the accountability of the results, but not the accountability to even be part of the process of picking the people who are getting you that result? So
Correct.
there is all kinds of philosophical questions, and and the answers could be as simple as, oh, we've always done it this way. Okay, well
Mhm.
now that delayers that there's another layer of, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Or like, oh, we can't trust our middle management people. Oh wait, hold on, you can trust them for this, how can you trust them for that? So there is, the more you take that layers off of the onion and get into the root of the philosophies, which I think that's why I said it's the one that is underestimated for its importance. The more you dig into philosophies, the better you will find out the root cause of the issues of your culture. I call philosophies in my book the soul of culture. You
Yeah.
could have a process, a robot that's doing whatever it's supposed to, but it's dead.
Hmm.
So without philosophies, your organization is really dead. And the more you define it, the more you push it into your normal process and instill it in your people, the more it's going to line up with what you want as a leader.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
true. It's very true. When we and you actually kind of tapped into the toxic norms, right? And the this is just the way we've always done it. You
Yeah.
know, and it's one of the worst excuses ever. Well, we've just always done it this way, you know. But and how's it serving us today, right?
Yeah.
How do we
Yeah.
reset that and tie it into your model, right? How do we tie it back into
Mm,
transforming the culture? Because we can say this is how we've always done it for all these years or all these
yeah.
generations, or the, you know, the people that are the complacent, I call them the complacent Charlies. They just duck and cover and they just get through because
Yeah.
that's just, it doesn't matter if I try to stand out because this is just how we've always done it. And it creates this, I'm going to use the word ugly
Mm,
environment culturally where people
yeah.
just, they're not motivated to come, they're not motivated to do more, to go above and beyond, and you diminish the value of the people that are there really striving, right? So
Yeah.
how do we reset when we find that we've got these toxic norms? What do you
And
suggest?
your questions are so awesome. We could spend like hours just discussing
Mhm.
this one question by itself. Like if you think about it, and I'm gonna pontificate a little bit philosophically, right? To say that's why we've done, like we're doing it because that's how we've always done it. Well, it depends. Have you always done it that way because you have a study that you do every 3 years, because you have a value of continuous improvement and you keep on bringing, counselors
Yeah.
and
How are you
people that are
measuring it,
expert? How
right?
are you
Yeah.
measuring that this is
Hmm.
still the best way? Because if the
Right.
answer is we've always done it that way based on ABC, well, that's great.
Hmm.
I don't want you as an, this is one of the things that I keep telling the CEOs that I coach, and the audience that listens to me is, I love diversity in the sense of the diversity of thought and how we bring new people in to give us ideas. I don't remember who it was. I think it might have been Steve Jobs. We hire people, so that smart people, so they can tell us what to do, type of idea, right? And within that is the notion of continuous improvement, diversity of thought, just
Hmm.
challenging each other so that we can get the best kind of outcome as a team, right?
Hmm.
I say diversity is great everywhere in the organization except philosophies. Okay.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, you don't want a leader who has a philosophy of continuous improvement to say, well, I'm open to that. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Yeah, let's just, most of my people don't want continuous improvement. So let's just go down that path because I just want to be open-minded about it. No. Your philosophies, and especially your core values, along with vision and mission, cannot be diverse. Like if
Yeah.
there is a disagreement, even not just between you and your people, it's between you and your upper management. If you're not
Hmm.
aligned on your philosophies, you're going to have a major issue as an organization. So to me, to answer your question, I think, as long as you're able to get into the root cause and the facts of where is our culture? Why is it the way it is? Is it a matter of philosophy or is it something else? I always start with, and just how my brain works, maybe from my CPA days, on a process perspective, I always start with Well, yeah, you're telling me there's all kinds of problems, but let's go upstream and find out, is it really a philosophy issue? When was the last time you've done an offsite with your team to make sure that your vision and mission and core values are aligned? Do you even have something? Actually, interesting enough, I was talking to an attorney recently, and he thinks their culture is great. I sense that their culture is great, and I started asking questions. They have something that they call the Green Book, that the whoever is the original owner and founder of that law firm, every single time they have a good philosophy, they put it in the Green Book. It's not a policy, it's not a process, it's not an onboarding, it's nothing like that. It's just, here is what we believe as XYZ law firm. And that Green Book gets taught, gets reviewed, gets in part of onboarding. And it's more than, "Hi, I'm an accountant, how should I do my..." No, this has nothing to do with process. It's just, how do we act as a, the 80 or 100 different individuals, if we're attorneys or admins, how do we all act? That's where the Green Book comes in. Do you have a Green Book as a leader? Do you invest time in it? And I think these are the things that I ask to ensure that, yes, it's one thing at a time, and what's the root cause of where you're at now. Hopefully that answers the question.
Well, I just actually, yes. And I was just listening going, oh, well, there's the next, that needs to be like a whole section in your next book. Cause I know you're writing another book. Do you have a
Yeah.
green book? Whatever color you pick,
Yeah.
do you have one? And cause here's how you might use it. And here's the why. And it's that piece that we go
Absolutely.
back to. And I love that you always bring it back to, what are we assessing? We need to assess. It's one thing to say, yeah, we have a great culture based on what? I'm
Yep.
curious. How do you define that?
Yep.
And if I were to ask 3 to 5 people in your organization, the newest to the most senior, what do you suppose they would say? And how would they define your culture? And I guarantee I'm going to get 3 to 5 completely different answers
Yep.
more often than I'm going to get an answer. Or, well, they'll repeat the values or the mission that we have on the wall because
Yep.
they've had to memorize it, but they don't know how that translates to the behaviors that we're wanting to see. And I deal in the world a lot with, how do we correct behaviors in the workplace? Well, if we haven't defined the behavior culturally, how we want to be known, seen, and celebrated, as I've said, what that looks like from a success standpoint for each division, each individual position, right? Not person, but position, then we're not able to actually build and say that we have a healthy culture if we haven't
Yep.
done the basic foundational elements of that. And
Yep.
I find a lot of times in my work, and I'd be curious about you, that I'll get out there and I'll work with execs that are very performance minded, and they're very much about the ROI, and they're like, culture, either it's the culture will take care of itself as long as we're hitting our numbers, right? Cash is king. I had one executive tell me all the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, seriously. Does everybody feel that way? Because not everybody's driven by money and bonuses either. So that's not
Yep.
going to help your performance and your culture. So I'm curious from your perspective, and you're the numbers, you've actually driven, teams on this, I know, but how do you translate that cultural change to performance minded execs who are really focused in on ROI hard?
Yeah. So
And maybe, sorry, I'm going to say it this way, Ed. And why does it matter? How do you tell them why it matters?
I'll throw a survey result that had taken place. I think it was a couple of years ago. Deloitte, big CPA firm, had put out there a question to executives, and there was like thousands, I think, of executives within this, and they basically asked multiple questions. One of the questions was this: how essential or how important is culture to you achieving your objectives or your results? 94% came back with the highest essential. Like, everybody knows culture is so important. Okay. Which is not a staggering stat. But 36% said they actually have the culture they desire. So if you're sitting back and you're saying, hold on, so if essentially 100% of executives or leaders believe the culture is so essential, why is it only 36, which I think is too high of a number, but let's just say it's 36%, kind of
But
correlates to employee
100%
engagement.
said, but
It's essential.
100% of them said it's essential. Yeah.
Exactly. So if 100% said it's essential, so it's basically everybody. A
Right.
third they have the culture they desire. So what about the other ones? Like, what about the 2/3? I haven't done a study on this yet, right? I think this is non-statistical, but there is some level of a third that I just don't think they care.
Yeah.
Culture is going to take time. It's going to take intention. I've audited hundreds and thousands of companies in my 25 years as a CPA. I can tell you, I don't remember one of them, maybe There's a couple, but I don't remember many that had culture as part of the incentive package to the CEOs or the C levels. They don't track it. They don't know how to define it. They don't care because the tenure of let's say of a large publicly traded company in the US of a CEO is what, 3 years, 3 to 5 years. Maybe it takes them 3 to 5 years to create culture. Why are they going to sow seeds for somebody else to pick it up? So it's that notion of, if we're not rewarded for it, if we're not, even if we know how to do it, they're not going to care, right? But then, and the reason I wrote the book is that last third, right? The last third that just don't know how to define it but want to know the ROI behind it, because it's pretty simple. Go to Chat GPT or Google or whatever you do it nowadays, and just ask that question: how important is culture to your results? And can you give me some surveys? I mean, if 3 times the profit increase and 7 times, or sorry, 3 times the revenue increase and 7 times the profit increase is not good enough for investors, what else?
Right.
I recently asked there's a person that works in private equity and like venture capitals. I asked them questions saying, hey, if you want to put an investment in a private equity, whatever, what is a good return on your investment for you to call it a good investment? And that person said 3 to 5. And I said, do you know that investing in your culture and leadership, which to some extent they are two sides of the same coin, that gets you 7 to 1 return? What else on your business plan gets you a 7 on average? So if you haven't really done any investment before, this could be up to 49 times what you invest in it. So the numbers and the ROI is there. The question really is, do executives care? Do they want to work on it? Do they just want to do their M&A or their strategic thing 1 to 2 years and flip and go somewhere else? That to me becomes the root cause of why people don't, even if they know how to do it and they know that the investment is really high, that's the root cause of why they just choose not to, because it's harder to define, harder to do. But I'm hopeful with the book and with my services that it's much easier now to actually go ahead and do it. Because honestly, I think there's a third that just don't know how. And with this terminology, with this culture creation model, hopefully they'll be able to really pinpoint it much easier and faster.
Well, and I think that what's unique about you is that you do break it down into the dollars and cents, and you bring the numbers game to it, that those hard-hitting CEOs or leaders, executives that are hard on the ROI and they just want to see results, right? Then you're speaking to them in a way, you're able to speak to them in a way that they're going to hear it and that it will be a wake-up call. So just well done on listening to that still small voice inside of you that said, wait, but wait, there's more. And so I think it's great.
And it's interesting, Tammy, even if you kind of continue that thought process, you as a CEO could come in and say, well, I love the returns on this. Let's do it. And you sit down with the CEO and you say, okay, well, to get to really good culture, you need to think of continuous improvement. And you look up and customer centric. I was talking to a CEO president of a higher ed college, and that person, when they took over, they went into the boardroom in the executive suite and took all of the pictures of all of the presidents that were previously there, because that's what it was. It was a maroon room, maroon tabletop, maroon chairs, and pictures of all the previous presidents. And what did that person do? Took all the pictures of all the previous presidents and put pictures of the students.
Nice.
Okay. So that's a philosophy, right? Then that is instilled in a process. I bet you if I go and talk to the predecessors and say, okay, great, you want great culture. Wait, hold on, you got to take your picture off the wall and let's put a picture of your students. Well, are they going to want to do that? They might see, and that's where egos come in. That's where humility is going to come in, and really the why. Or do you believe in the why to a point where you might step yourself aside so that you can put your employees first, so that they, including you, can put your customer first. So it's not only a matter of an ROI, it's going to require a behavior change if needed by the executive leaders. So if you're an executive leader that wants a culture of respect, you hire a person like me to come in and help you with the culture of respect, but you're yelling and screaming at your employees. well, this is not going to work out.
Correct.
No matter how many
Correct.
people you go and hire, it's not
Right.
going to work out.
No.
So, anyways, that's just my plug within it.
Yeah, no, but and there's huge value in that. You know, one of the questions that I ask the leaders that I go in and work with is, who's your customer? Who's your number one customer? And they'll all go, oh, well, it's this. And they'll start naming the organizations or the outside entities. And I'm like, yeah, you're actually the leader here, right? You're the, whatever the title is, your number one customer are the people that report to you. That's who you serve. You
Yep.
make things possible for, no, they serve me. I had one CEO say, are you kidding? They serve, no. Well, maybe that's how you think it, but then we just broke it all down and, and mapped it out for them so they could see, oh, wow, you're right. I have it backwards. If I give them what they need, they're going to go out and serve the end user, the customer, in a way far better than I can, because I'm only one of me, but I have 250 of them. So
Yep.
that's who we need. That's who me and my team need to focus on, because
Yep.
there's more of their hands than there are mine.
Absolutely.
So,
And the love to your, and I do use the love word, but the love as a leader, because you're not going to go serve somebody you don't love. So you're going to, as a leader, go and
yeah,
actually love, I mean, in a very
you love on
professional
them
way,
for
you
sure.
love on them, your
Yeah.
people. Now there's aspects of tough love, there's aspects of accountability, etc., etc.
And that's a whole other episode
It's
we get to do.
a whole different episode. But the idea would be that unless you understand as a leader that it is through your people that you're going to go and ultimately serve your customer, because there are many organizations, even internally, and I talk about it in the book. I call it functional equity. But many people, even internally, I mean, what's the purpose of a finance organization? They're not going to go deliver the product or services, right? What's the point of a legal organization? They're not going to deliver the products or services. But what they're doing is they're serving each other. You, the leader, serving everybody under you, and they serving each other so that you collectively go and serve your customer. So if you're not serving them, they're not giving you their best, guess what? You're going to just be an average or below average organization. But if you are serving them, they're serving each other so that everybody together understands that we are now there to serve our customer. That's where magic happens. That's where the 7 times your investment, 7 times your profit comes in, just with that mindset. But again, the trick is, how do you take that, live it as a leader, but also go embed it in a process? So I'm not in every meeting. Like if you're a leader who let's say believes in highest ethical standards, okay, well, you're not going to be in every single meeting, especially if you're a larger organization. How do you make sure that that value becomes a part of the norm of everybody inclusive in the process? That's where the magic comes in.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. All right. So I've kept you a little longer in the sandbox today, but I have 2 more fun questions, rapid fire for you. You ready?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
If you could hand every leader one sticky note tomorrow, what would it say?
So I've developed this slogan that I use in all of my speeches, all of my workshops, and I call it "Exceptional Leaders Cultivate Exceptional Culture." I read this book called Above the Line. I think it was Urban Meyer, the football coach, who wrote it. And there's this one statement in it that said, average leaders use quotes or say quotes. Great leaders have a vision. And typically people will be like, oh, okay, that's where you, no. And then he says, exceptional leaders have a system. So average leaders, quotes, great leaders, vision, exceptional leader, system. This is the point in my view. Exceptional leaders cultivate exceptional culture. You cannot say you're an exceptional leader until and unless you cultivate exceptional culture.
That's powerful. Very cool. What color would the sticky note be?
Black and gold, just like my
black and gold, like your branding,
like my logo.
All right. So here's a sentence I want you to finish for me. Culture is only as strong as
its culture-driven leaders.
That's very good. Yeah.
Then you have to be driven by culture as a leader. Otherwise, it's going to be haphazard and it's just not going to work. So culture is only as strong as its culture-driven leaders.
Okay. Well, there you go. Well, yet I'm so glad that you came into the sandbox with me today. You brought some really great information, and I know that we covered a lot. And folks, I want to encourage you to go and get the book, The Culture Driven Organization. Grab your copy today and head over to his website as well, which is Cultivate Cultures LLC, right? No.
That's good.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Cultivate
Good.
Culture, www.cultivateculturellc.com. Yep.
So leaders, if you, at the end of this conversation that we've shared here today, if you find that your culture isn't matching your values, isn't matching the behaviors that you're seeing, what you want is not what you're seeing, don't panic. get curious, start asking better questions, start leading like culture actually matters, because it really, truly does, as we've talked here today. Grab a copy of Eyad's book and get in touch with them, because he can certainly come in and help transform your culture to get it to from what you say and see that you think that you want, so you can get it to what you truly are now as an outcome, having what you want and what you say. So important. And I appreciate you, Eyad, for your time today. Thank you for joining me in the sandbox for this conversation. And folks, until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and God bless you.